As we continue through our study in the book of Mark, we are at Mark chapter 8, verses 27 through 38, and I titled this, Who is Your Jesus? We're going to focus on Christ and Christ's role and what things have transpired and how we have a Savior that is not an afterthought but has been there from the beginning. It's not something that God decided later on that, we're going to have to solve this problem. No, it was known all along. So we're going to go through a bunch of verses. If you look at your bulletin, you'll see a long list of them. We're not going to spend time going through each verse fully, but just highlighted sections. And this is hopefully will help us to, as we get back into the book of Mark, get us a foundation and grounded in. There's also a fascinating little portion on Caesarea Philippi. Town we've heard of. That comes in this teaching here, it teaches us so much more. So starting off with verse 27, Jesus went out along with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he questioned his disciples, saying to them, "Who do people say that I am?" Throughout the history of the Israelites, the Jewish people, they have always been looking for that promised Messiah. Christ means the anointed one. So that's what that word means. It's not Jesus Christ as a first name and last name. Jesus is the Christ, the anointed one. And the people throughout all the generations were looking forward to when that was going to actually happen. Now, for many times they were looking for someone other than who Jesus truly was going to be. They were looking for a military leader. They were looking for a world ruler. They were looking for all these things. But throughout all of Scripture in the Old Testament, there were many times when many people understood that that was not so. That's not who the Messiah was going to be. So starting off, a good place to start when we look at who Jesus is to go to Genesis 3:21. The Lord made garments of skin for Adam and for his wife Eve and clothed them. Okay. After the fall, they realized they were naked, and God made them garments of skin. In order to make them garments of skin, some animal or animals needed to die. This was the whole concept, again, of understanding the blood. It's very important for us to understand what God talks about when he talks about blood, because in the blood is life, and we learned that from in Leviticus. But first, let's look at Isaiah 61:10. For he clothed me with garments of salvation, and he wrapped me in the robe of righteousness. Do you see how this Isaiah description fits back into the garden, or after the garden, after they were thrown out of the garden? So we can apply that concept to our lives, because Christ is the one that clothes us with righteousness because of what he did for us. Because in Leviticus 17:11, the life of the flesh is in the blood by reason of the life that makes atonement. So the life is in the blood, and we talk about Jesus shedding his blood. And that's why the blood part is so important, because it's used over and over again as the requirement. And you say, well, why blood instead of life is in the brain or life is in the heart? The blood is unique in the sense that it encompasses every part of our bodies. The brain is one piece, the heart is one piece, but the blood is throughout. Every part of us has the blood in it. So the wholeness of our life is demonstrated by the blood. In Hebrews 1, verses 1 through 3, God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers and the prophets, these last days has spoken to us in his Son. The writer of Hebrews has acknowledged the reality that God has spoken going way back. The promise of the Redeemer, the promise of the Messiah was known going all the way back to the beginning. But in these last days, the days after the Old Testament era, into the New Testament era, he speaks to us through his Son because his Son came and spoke to us directly. The Messiah, the Christ, the chosen one, is Jesus. In Luke 2:25, looking for the consolation of Israel. And then in Luke 2:38, looking for the redemption of Jerusalem. In both of these cases, this is a time when Jesus as a baby was brought to the temple. And he was brought to the temple, I say on the 8th day for circumcision, because that's what God had required. And then you had Simeon and then you had Anna. They both were there. And they both saw the child for who the child was, not just an other baby boy. They knew there was something here. Because Simeon was looking for the consolation of Israel, bringing Israel together. Okay? And Anna was looking for the redemption of Israel. They're both looking for the same thing. They're looking for the Messiah, the one who is to come, the one who had been prophesied way back to the beginning. In Luke 1:41 through 45, dropping down to verse 45, blessed is she who believed, a fulfillment of what had been spoken to her by the Lord. This is when Mary is visiting her cousin Elizabeth, in the time when she came and John the Baptist, still in the womb, leaped for joy. Because even before John was born, there was an understanding that this child was somebody really special. He leaped for joy. And it's a fulfillment. See, God makes a promise. God says this is what is going to happen, and then one day it happens. That promise was fulfilled. In Hebrews 5, verse 10, the order of Melchizedek. Melchizedek is an interesting character because Melchizedek is mentioned in Genesis with Abraham and then mentioned again in Hebrews. Now, Melchizedek is a type as opposed and a type of Christ, because he's listed as someone that has no beginning or end. Now, Melchizedek himself as the human being did. Okay, I don't believe that he had no beginning or end, otherwise he'd be God. He was not God, but he was a representative of that mindset, of understanding that reality, that there was no beginning, there was no end. If you look at genealogies, you will never find one for Melchizedek. It's never mentioned a father, a mother, or anything. And he is demonstrating that just like Jesus, Jesus always existed. Melchizedek is just representing that. No beginning, no end. What verse or Hebrews 7:26? Our high priest, he became our high priest. He is our high priest. He's holy, he's innocent, he's undefiled. He's separated from sinners and will be and is exalted above the heavens. An obvious telling of who our Jesus is. Jesus came, and of course, this is in Hebrew, so this is in the New Testament. But he is holy. The Christ is holy. The Christ is innocent. Innocent means that he literally is not guilty of any wrongdoing whatsoever. Undefiled, not stained by sin, and also not stained with original sin, but separate from sinners, unique, different, special, and exalted to the heavens. In Hebrews 11, 13 through 16, all of these died without receiving the promises. Now this is always something I've always found interesting. See, all these promises that are made from going way back, that there is a Messiah that is coming, the king, the conquering king, and the land of Israel, the territory of Israel. You notice that Abraham, Isaac, Jacob never received a foothold in that land. They were promised it, and it was never fulfilled. Well, God made a promise and he didn't keep it? That doesn't sound right. There's a problem with that, okay? Because God makes a promise, it's kept. There isn't no God says and he doesn't do. It's always God says and it is. A promise from God is just as good as something that's already accomplished. So it's an understanding of what this promise was. And here the writer of Hebrews explains it. Because he talks about they were strangers and exiles on earth. In other words, they were promised something, but they were strangers and exiles on this planet, on earth. And then down to verse 16, but as it is, they desire a better country. See, they knew that that was not it. It wasn't this chunk of dirt that was important. What was important is what comes after that. What was important is the fact that God's people would see a heavenly home, not an earthly home. They were looking for what? Desired a better country that is a heavenly one. Then he has prepared a city for them, it says. See, we're not looking forward to everlasting life, to unending life here. Our everlasting life is in heaven, which will eventually include the new heavens and the new earth. It's all part of it. And this is what the writer of Hebrews is telling us about the forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all the descendants after them as they represent those who belong to Christ. In Psalm 13, verse 5, it talks about your salvation. In Psalm 40, verse 16, it talks about your salvation. See, we have a tendency to think of this backwards. We think this Christ came to save us, so it becomes our salvation. The salvation belongs to God. It is his salvation that he bestows on us. He is the originator of the salvation. He is the owner of the salvation. In Hebrews 9, verse 28, Hebrews again, and I got me thinking that maybe my next series will be the book of Hebrews, because, boy, there's a whole lot of fascinating stuff in here. He came to offer to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time for salvation without reference to sin. Now, that's also another interesting little line. See, Jesus came, okay, and he bore the sins of many. He took on himself the sins of all of his people. He took on himself the sins of the world. But he's going to appear a second time. And I find it fascinating when it says, for salvation without reference to sin. See, he came for the first time to deal with sin. It's been dealt with. It doesn't need to be dealt with again. When he comes again, it's not about sin, but about taking us home. So it has nothing to do with the fact of the sin. That's been dealt with. That's taken care of. That's been wiped away. In Acts 1, verse 6. Here's where the disciples still didn't get it. And we can go back and we can look and say, why did you come on? It was so obvious. Jesus had told you directly what was going to happen, and you never, ever got it. Because now here's Peter is talking. Peter is saying to Jesus, this is after the resurrection, but before his ascension. And Peter says to Jesus, at this time, are we now at that point to where you are now going to set up your kingdom here on earth? Restoring Israel? He didn't get it. He still did not understand. Because at the ascension, we see it in Acts 1, verses 9 through 11. In that little part, in verse 11. Why do you stand looking to the sky? See, this is at the ascension. At the moment Jesus ascends into heaven, the angel comes and stands by the disciples and says, why are you standing there looking? Can you imagine why they were standing there looking? Is he coming back? Did he leave us behind? What is happening? We spent 3.5 years with Jesus. We went through this crucifixion. We saw the resurrected Lord, and now he is just ascending. Maybe we stand here and we wait. He's coming back. This Jesus who was taken away will return in the same way. Now let's go back to Mark. Okay, so far we've covered one verse in Mark. We've got a few more to go. Verses 28 through 30. Remember, Jesus had asked the question at the beginning here, who do people say that I am? Okay, now we're going to the next verse. They told him, saying, John the Baptist, others say Elijah, but others one of the prophets. And he continued by questioning them, but who do you say that I am? Peter answered him and said to him, you are the Christ. See, Peter made a bold statement here. He's saying, no matter what anybody else says, no matter what anybody else thinks, I know you are the Christ. Did Peter understand what that meant? Totally? No. But he just trusted. He just put his faith in Jesus. You are the Christ. You are the one that was talked about going all the way back to Adam and Eve. You are the one that was prophesied. You are the Messiah. Matthew 16:18, I had to put that in there because it clarifies the next verse a little bit better. But I also say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it. Now we're going back to Caesarea Philippi. Because you have to understand what was just said and where they were when it was said. The two are tied together very clearly. Caesarea Philippi is a city north of Galilee that was a very popular place of worshiping the Greek god Pan. Okay, it was a very idolatrous area. In this area, there was also these cliffs. And in the cliffs, there were caves that went down inside. And the worshipers of Pan believed that the gods would go into these caves, and this is where they would stay during the winter months, and then they would come back out when the weather warmed up, because apparently they didn't like cold weather. I guess the gods don't like cold weather, so, but anyway. So they would go in, so they had this mindset that going into those caves, deep in those caves, led you into hell. Okay? Which for them was a good thing. Okay? I've heard people talk about that they think hell's a good thing. Believe me, they don't understand. But anyway, you got Caesarea Philippi, that's the type of area it is. Jesus is standing there in that area. And you can almost imagine that behind him are these caves. And where Jesus said, the gates of Hades shall not overpower it. And he began to teach in verse 31 that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. Jesus is very clearly telling them this is what's going to happen. But he also has said, and we kept that from Matthew, that he's establishing the beginning of the New Testament church. And as Peter is a representative, Peter is not the one first pope or any of that stuff, but he's a representative of the establishment of the New Testament church. And he's talking to him about how the gates of Hades will not prevail against it, as Hades is known to be the place where they're standing, right behind him, into those caves. See, how Caesarea Philippi got its name was because of Herod Philippi, okay, who was the brother of the Herod that we know, you might say, when Jesus was crucified, who is the son of Herod the Great, who we know from the person that was king at the time that Jesus was born and tried to kill off all the babies. Okay? Herod Philippi took that town and he renamed it. But why did he used Caesarea Philippi. Well, Caesarea speaks of Caesar. So it was Caesar Philippi. I'm going to put the emperor first, because otherwise I might get in trouble, and I'm going to use my name so that my name continues forever. So that's how it got its name. But like I said, this area was filled with idol worship. And as I was looking at this and as I was studying this and I'm thinking about all of the ancient religions, idol worshipers, there was one thing that was in common with every one of them. And it dawned on me that actually makes perfect sense. Because if you're going to lead men astray, what is the strongest thing that you can use to lead them astray? Provide them with really good food, provide them with a comfortable place to live, provide them with all of these luxuries in life, or go attack their weakest point. And what is the weakest point with men? Sex. It is. And if you look at all of the idol worshipers, that was tied to it consistently. Satan is no dummy. He knows how to manipulate people. And if he can get the men to draw in to this type of worship, he's drawing them away from God. And that's his goal. That hasn't changed. That same problem still exists today. It's always been there, and it will be until we are called home. So using Caesarea Philippi as a place to announce the New Testament church and how it is going to overcome and stand in the way of and block the power of Satan himself. Because he will not be able to overcome it. He will not be able to destroy it. Because we have God on our side. Because we have a Redeemer, the promised one, this Jesus who is the Christ. Verse 32 and 33. And he was stating the matter plainly. See, Jesus talked quite often. We talked about, how he would speak in parables and really people couldn't quite understand. But here, he's point blank saying it. You might say, no more beating around the bush, no more using this illustration or that illustration. He's clearly stating it. He's stating he is going to die and he is going to rise again. He stated the matter plainly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Peter is saying, no, this cannot happen. I'm going to stop it. I'm going to prevent this from happening. But turning around and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on God's interest, but on man's." See, Peter didn't really understand that Jesus needed to go through this, that Jesus was going to suffer and Jesus was going to die, but also that he was going to rise again. But in Peter's mind, Jesus, you're my friend. You're my rabbi. I've been with you all this time, and I'm not going to allow this to happen. I will put my own life on the line. I showed how weak that was a little later on. Right? We say the same things. We make all these promises, but no. Jesus says, no, that's Satan's talk. Verse 34 and 35, and he summoned the crowd with his disciples, and he said to them, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. Jesus very clearly is saying, you follow me, don't worry about the cost. You just believe me, you trust me, without worrying about the cost of it. But it's going to cost you. Now, for us, it's sometimes kind of difficult to understand that, because for us, we live in a place and a time where it really isn't that difficult, or so we think. How many times are we drawn into this or into that without even realizing it? Primarily through the social media, through the news media, to people that we meet, and we can easily see how we're drawn into it. We're not standing our ground like we should. Because it's so normal, it's so regular, it's no big deal. Are we willing to take a stand? Verses 36 through 38, for what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what will man give in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father with his holy angels. That's a verse that's scary. And it should be scary. If we are afraid to take our stand, proudly proclaiming that we belong to Christ, and I don't think it's the unpardonable sin or anything like that, but it should really, really bother us that when we fail those opportunities. And Jesus is talking about how serious this deal this really is. We need to be straightforward, bold, saying, you're ashamed of me? Do you really want me to be ashamed of you? No, I don't want that. So I'm going to stand boldly. Because this kingdom is not of this world. We live in this world. We might even do our physical death in this world. But the kingdom of God is not of this world. So I'm ending here with a few questions. Okay? Starts off with, as our title, who is your Jesus? Okay? Is he the one that provides for your daily needs? Yeah. He does that. He's the one that solves your problems. Yeah, he helps with that quite a bit. I mean, maybe not all of them, but most of them. He's the one that purchased your salvation. Yes, he did all that. Or the ultimate. The one that you serve with thanksgiving because of who he is. Are we willing to get off of the bandwagon of what can you do for me, Jesus? And instead, regardless, it's because who you are. It's not the things that you do. This is what the crowds had, if you remember. They followed for the miracles and the food. We can fall into that same trap. It's what can I get? Instead of, he is worthy because of who he is.